Oh, I guess not. Any announcements? No?
No.
Go ahead.
I would like to make one announcement to encourage people. The Morro Bay Open Space Alliance is sponsoring a concert featuring Ken Nagano and his daughter on the 8th at St. Timothy's. And Ken Nagano is a world-renowned conductor and also a local boy who grew up in Morro Bay at the feet of Cerrito Peak. And this concert is being sponsored in order to raise money to preserve Cerrito Peak.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. We can move on.
Should I go ahead, Scott?
Yeah, please.
Okay, can everyone hear me? All right, well, we are back for our second round of review of Plan Morro Bay. Here's our agenda for today. It's a little hard to see, so we'll see how it goes. And is it an option to turn some of the lights off if we need to? Okay. So I don't believe this has changed since 2 weeks ago. We're in the middle of reviewing the draft. We will continue reviewing with you on the 14th of June, and then we'll go to other review bodies as well. The zoning code update continues. We expect to have Module 4 and the zoning map ready for your review on June 21st. And the draft environmental impact report also is still being drafted. So we left off last time with the land use element, and so I wanted to start there again. These are the same slides as last time. I did add the page numbers, and I think that's about it for reference. So I wanted to see if there were more comments on that element or if we wanted to move on to the next element. And I guess, jumping back slightly, if there are things that are pretty straightforward that don't really require discussion, because we do want to get through the whole plan this meeting and next meeting, if you could just give us written comments that are for things that are straightforward edits or input, that would be really great.
I should have made it in comments, but did we get any reply back when we asked you about Coastal sharing the information with us that they use to determine their decisions? You guys were going to check on that, and I haven't heard anything from you yet.
Was that something you were going to follow up on, Scott?
It is. I haven't talked with Coastal about it yet. We have a laundry list of items pending at Coastal. In fact, just got a email back that they still haven't gotten to the stuff that we've already sent them.
They what now?
We just got an email back from them saying that they haven't gotten to the information that we've requested. We have several items pending before them to get information back on it. So several information requests, review requests, and this is going to be one of the things that would be in line with that.
Thanks.
Do we have to turn these on, or are they already on?
I think they're already on, and then
Okay.
you can turn them off if you want to.
Okay. I had a couple of conversations with people about I was following up on the vacation rental discussion we had here before. And at least a couple of real estate people seemed concerned that because it's been the practice for the vacation rental licenses to go with the property, that if they were taken away or they weren't allowed to continue with the property, that there would be some impairment of the property values for those properties. Also, that if there was spacing, I guess 200 feet or 250 feet apart, that would eliminate most of the current ones if they weren't kept in effect. Anyway, it doesn't change my opinion from last time, but I wanted to at least share that with the group.
I would note that we are going to on June 20th. We're going to have a meeting here in the community center. I think it's from 6 to 8, where we're going to talk about vacation rentals, and we'll take the Planning Commission recently reviewed the vacation rental policies and made some changes to them, And we will have that revised version of the vacation rental ordinance for review at that meeting, so folks have something to talk about and have the latest and greatest version of the policy that's out there. So I would add that to
Okay.
the information that'll become available, moving forward into that meeting. That meeting was sponsored by council members Heading and McPherson.
So any other comments related to the land use element, or should we move to the next element?
Just one quick question. On figure LU4 of the coastal dependent uses, isn't the oyster farm down in the south end of the bay? And that would be page 329. And it's just, if we are considering them aquaculture, it seemed like there would be a blue dot down there.
So adding that. We do have them noted, they're on land facility,
Up at the north end.
but we could definitely add,
Yeah. I
in
put
the
them
bay.
down there just because it makes it an interesting,
And I'm not sure the location, they're actually being required to go through permitting with coastal. They predate the Coastal Commission, those areas, but now coastal's requiring them to get a coastal development permit, so they're working through that process. But I'm not sure that the beds that are down there are actually in city limits. I think
they might be in the state park.
I think they're out. I think they might be
Yeah,
outside.
yeah.
Okay.
But we'll absolutely look at that because that's a good point. And if it's inside city limits, we should probably worthwhile noting. If they're outside, then it doesn't do any good for the document. Probably have to do it.
And did we talk last time about policy LU46, the recreational uses, oceanfront lands designated for open space recreation use shall be protected for recreational use and development unless present and foreseeable future demand for public or commercial recreational activities that could be accommodated on the property is already adequately provided for in the area? I couldn't figure that out. Oh, sorry, page
I think
332.
a couple people did mention that it was confusing, so we were going to take
Gonna
another
rewrite
look
that
at
one.
it.
And
Okay.
a language question mark
Yeah.
note next to that.
Okay, good. Okay. Anybody else have anything in land use? Okay. Yeah, as long as we're going to address vacation rental stuff at another time, I think I'm good.
Yeah, so so you've looked at it once. Planning Commission has looked at it in the form of Module 3 to the zoning code, and they provided input to that. And so we're going to take input from the community before we do anything else. And so then we'll be probably going back through the process then and refining the language and seeing whether it's going to be included in the zoning code update that we're processing right now or trail behind, because it can't slow the process down. We have deadlines.
Right. Okay.
Okay, should I move on?
Yep.
And what I was thinking about doing today, and you can let me know if this is not a good approach, it seems like it would work well with how things went last time, is I'll introduce an element and then we can discuss, and then we'll go to the slides for each one as we go. And we don't have to wait for the whole thing, and we don't know how far we're going to get, so that's the plan. So next we have the community design element, 3C, and it starts, as do all the others, with an overview and then how this element relates to resiliency in the city. This element talks about what we were calling the community character areas, and this is something that is in your existing general plan LCP. We've updated it and we have refined it a little bit over the course of the process. Here's the map, so you can see we have ten, I believe, character areas that mostly follow the topography and general use of the area. Some areas have much more of a mix of things going on than others, like the North Embarcadero would be a good example of that. So we have a write-up, a description and vision for each of these areas. And the key issue in this element that really rose to the top out of the process was neighborhood compatibility in residential areas. So we have bit of a focus there. And then we have the goals and policies, as we do in the rest of the elements. So I believe that's it for the intro. If you have any input on this element or questions.
I had a question. There was for a couple of years, like a halfway house in my neighborhood, and I think we're like 6 or 8 adults that were living in a house, and there was a lot of parking and other issues, but you know, that's a worthy use of property, but it was in a residential neighborhood. So I'm wondering what are the how do the mix of rules versus neighborhood compatibility, how does that all work with say a group home or something like that?
I don't think that's something that's addressed in this plan, but that is something that is addressed by state law. So it's part of the zoning, and halfway houses, if they qualify as what's called transitional housing, under state law, are required to be allowed in the same way as any other residential use is allowed. So that's in all zones that allow residential. So Morro Bay's code was updated a couple years ago to address that state law that I think it's about 10 years old.
Okay.
And there are regulations that go into it related to availability for parking based on demand,
Right.
if they exceed a certain size, meaning they serve a certain population number. So.
Thank you.
This is page 3C, policy CD. Oh, I'm sorry, 3-56. Policy CD 1.2. Work with residents and business owners to develop and adopt citywide design guidelines that illustrate the appropriate form, et cetera, et cetera. It just struck me that adopt citywide designs, means designs that would apply to all of the city. But in fact, we're talking about having specific designs for specific areas, and it's pretty clear later on in the document. So maybe we should omit citywide design. It's not really.
I think that's a good point, and I would possibly suggest clarifying it, for areas that do not have area-specific design guidelines. I think the intent with this policy is that at some point there are design guidelines for the rest of the city, because, as you know, they have been now put in place for the downtown and waterfront, for example, and there are the interim residential. But I think the idea is that, from what we've heard through the process, that there would be an effort to do that for the rest of the city. Does that
Was that CD
sound okay?
13?
Yes.
Okay.
We also have some design guideline policies that do apply both to residential areas generally and to commercial areas generally in the zoning code update portion of it too.
The one last year?
So the zoning code that we're in the process of updating right now, module 2 or 3 has it in there?
Well, so we've got, and again, if the language could be improved, please say so. But policy CD 1.3, that is the guidelines, so the non-regulatory portion of the design effort. And then CD 1.4 is the standards, and that's what's calling for the work that's being done in the zoning code. So we tried to split them into those two policies.
And it's identified that way in the implementation section in the back.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
So I had a question on page 349.
349? Give us a chance to
Yeah.
get there.
Back up and find it. It's under the cloisters at the bottom, talking about
It's hard to see these numbers.
redevelopment
349, okay.
of the area where the wastewater treatment plant is. And talking about including restaurant, retail, additional accommodations, to me, I wondered about those uses in a place that we're abandoning for major infrastructure because of the hazards that that zone holds. And so it makes sense to put sports fields and recreational activities in there, but I wonder if, would development, say, of a major conference center be approved in that area if it's in a tsunami and 100-year flood zone? Or is that just a risk that the developer would take on and pay a lot of extra insurance for?
So I backed up to the land use map so you can see how that area is proposed to be designated. So we did consider that issue, and we didn't put the visitor serving right on the most of the area by the water, although there is some.
There is some because of the existing
Yeah, the mobile
campground.
home park,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so it reflects existing uses that are there.
Okay.
Which is why that's that way. But as Amy said, the idea was to push it further back where that we, because some of the property as you get towards the east side of the city property, not the specific area where the plant currently sits, but inland from that, gets on higher ground out of the floodplain potentially.
Okay.
And then there also would be a master plan required for that area, which would definitely address environmental impacts.
Okay.
And
So it's not likely to trigger problems in terms of coastal saying, well, we don't think you should have that kind of development there.
No, in fact, we've had conversations.
so
We
far.
sat down around a table and talked to them about this up at Coastal.
Okay.
They were generally okay with it when we were
Okay.
developing the land use map draft.
That's a good question.
So the elevation is high enough for these proposed developments, but it's not high enough for the wastewater treatment plant to be moved up in that area then?
Well, there's some other properties that are up there that would have to be probably combined together, and so potentially, yes, you could have a small footprint of something that would be out of the floodplain there.
Okay, so
Unlikely an entire wastewater treatment plant. That footprint's fairly large.
that's what I just,
Absolutely, no, you're right.
because somebody's going to jump up and say that on,
They've jumped up and said it several times already. So
if you can put restaurant and retail and additional stuff, surely you could put a wastewater. I'm just being the devil's advocate here.
it's a fair point and one that's been raised. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that language wants to stay there.
I think that you can have some level of those types of things, and so that it just identifies what types of those uses you could put there. And there are constraints that go into that. Can you get it out of the floodplain? Can you address those types of issues or not?
Well, maybe, I think the point you're making is that maybe you'd want to put that qualification in here and say, well, in areas that would not be impacted by, in the flood zone, or some kind of thing like that, where rather than just a general statement of, oh, you can put restaurants here.
Yeah, kind of like what you said
Yeah.
in reply to me at first, Scott, is that you said
That's a good answer.
there'll be enough, certain part would be enough to build something mentioned here, but not enough for a wastewater treatment plant. So what is the requirement for acreage for that versus a restaurant? We know that that's different, but maybe to flesh it out a little bit better, more clear, so that it's, yeah.
Or just a general reference to the elevation issue that, where the elevations permit or something like that would at least qualify the statement.
Anybody else? No? No? Go on to economic development.
Okay, so 3D economic development element. We start with an overview and an approach to resiliency. There is a section on demographics. This comes from the community baseline assessment, and it is a very brief excerpt. So I think as we discussed at the last meeting, the full demographics and economic analysis are in the baseline assessment. The key issues that are highlighted in this element are affordable housing, market surplus and leakage, stagnated population and jobs growth, and providing for the needs of both residents and visitors. And then we have goals and policies for each of those as well. And that is a brief introduction.
Thanks. And before we move on to comments from the committee, we have one member in our audience, Erica, who's with the Chamber of Commerce. Did you want to make any comment? Okay. We're just giving opportunity since we moved our location. All right. So, comments?
I guess the one question on the issue of a stagnated population growth, Morro Bay is sort of unique, it seems, for most, I guess Cayucas has it to some degree as well, but the fact that these areas, they're attractive areas and they have high quality of life, and yet you don't see the population growing. And when you look at job growth and housing affordability and all that, I mean, I think they're all related, but is there, did you get a sense of when you were putting this together, whether something ought to be done about that, or is it just something that is sort of an inevitable trend that we can't really do much to impact?
Well, I think maybe different people would have different answers to that. But some of the things that we identified have to do with making this a place where people of all ages and types can afford to live. And that was one thing we heard, that isn't always the case. So you don't get growth of certain groups. Of course, I think, like you already said, it's a place that is a limited geography. So, what is the right number? I think there would be different answers to that as well. There is a growth measure in place.
Right, but it's about 20% higher than what we have
right.
currently and have had for many years.
And then there is the units that are not occupied issue, which we've talked about a lot
Right.
lately. So those would be the things that I would think of off the top of my head about why that's happening currently.
Some of it leads into diversification of the economy. I mean, that's part of the policy section of this talks about that. Implementation of plans that the city's recently adopted, right? Downtown and Waterfront Strategic Plan is largely economic development related, and then we have the Economic Development Strategic Plan, which we're partnered with the Chamber and Council's approved funding to facilitate that partnership to move the policies in that document forward. So there's a lot of different fronts that this affects, and you have to kind of start running down all of them to gain any ground, really. And so we're in the beginning stages of doing that, working through the pieces of the Economic Development Strategic Plan pieces. We'll be looking at housing again after we're done with this process. We're also looking at removing barriers in our zoning code to housing, because right now we have issues in our zoning code where you can't reach the densities that are described on properties in town, and you can't get there because of height and setback issues. Those are problems, and so those are barriers that we have to work toward removing, and we're doing that through the zoning code update as well. So those are you got to remove the barriers first. If you make things more amenable to more development, then they will come, and then you want to have policies in place that accommodate that development, and that's kind of we're at the beginning stages of moving down those roads now.
So affordable housing, when I see those words, is kind of with I fall back to when I funded with CDBG and housing money, affordable housing projects. Are we still talking about that same animal when we talk about that? Because what I'm getting at is that so far I haven't seen any mention on income as far as median income, HUD guidelines. What I'm getting at is I've talked to a lot of people around here. We throw this around, and there's really the wage is not high enough to afford. It's below what even HUD asked for. So how are we going to put that in here?
Well, it's in our documents now. It's we again the diversification of the economy, the improvement of the economy. A lot of the things in the Economic Development Strategic Plan are meant to improve the city's economy. to raise levels of income, to bring
Right.
more money into the community and those types of things. So they help do that. Then you also have to look at, cost of housing, providing more housing. We have a housing deficiency, as does every place on the Central Coast. And again, part of that is removing the barriers. Part of that is looking at it. One of the things we're doing is adding housing into the downtown by increasing height limits potentially. One of the things that the Planning Commission will be taking on next week that the GPAC has already seen. So, those are all part of those are all part of the concepts behind improving and adding housing units and the ability to add housing. We've also implemented and are proposing, and you've seen this, the mixed-use overlays to encourage housing units to be developed in areas where they wouldn't otherwise have been developed, and to have that sort of synergy where you can locate more people maybe in the downtown area where there are amenities and you can walk to things, that type of thing. I mean, we're doing all those things, and those are all coming out in the plan. So we're actively pursuing things to add housing units, to add density, to improve the economy.
Okay, and I guess why I bring that up too, Scott, is, and I don't want to go off on the vacation rental, but it's frustrating for me to sit back with what I know about affordable housing and now being an owner of a vacation rental on my property to hear vacation rentals receiving the brunt of the blame for the lack of affordable housing. The people that the wages is just as big as an issue. Our place, if we rent it, there's not very many people would be able to afford our rent, or yours is coming up. So I don't hear that addressed enough in my mind. As it's easy to throw one segment of what's going on under the bus, like people tried to do with the buses and the RVs and the boats. But there's a whole bunch of problems that we have in the city that I don't think we're looking at it holistically enough. And so I guess I'm getting carried away. So I'll back off.
It's a fair point. I think we are trying to look at all, many of those things. I understand the frustration, with that specific issue. It's a community-wide issue, and one that's not going to be easy to resolve.
Yeah.
It's also one that's easy for people to not like, right? It's easy to not like having vacation rentals next to you, whether you have issues with them or not in your neighborhood. It's easy for you to go, even if I don't have them, I don't want them. So, so you're part of what's happening there is. You're fighting a little bit of an uphill battle, with some of that. There's a lot of perception issues with them.
Yeah.
I would just say too, for some of what you're asking about, it's in the housing element, so that is a couple years old, and we're not reviewing it in this piece. But in terms of the state income information and so forth, and then the short-term rental or low-cost visitor accommodation memo that includes short-term rental analysis has some of the data that backs up or doesn't back up some of those arguments that you were just talking about.
I think. Yeah, I figured Amy would be in the housing element. But could we possibly, or would you guys think it'd be beneficial to, when somebody's reading this as far as economic development, for them to have a refer to, see section whatever housing element for more information or something like that to connect?
Yeah,
I know
once the
I know
plan
how
is
to go look
final,
for that, but
they're
most
all going to
people
be
won't know.
together on the website.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if we could, if someone's looking in this part, would they know? Well, I wonder what the.
Once we have the adopted plan, then
Uh-huh.
the housing element will be
Connected there?
section G, 3G.
Section G, right.
Yeah, so it's in the table of contents.
Right.
It's just not under review right now.
Understood.
Yeah.
But if we could we just put something to connect those two where people could read that,
Yeah.
So let's stop there for a second.
Sure.
I'm not sure I follow. So to connect, you're talking about cross-referencing for policies that are discussed in here that might have relevance to the housing element?
No,
Or-
I was actually talking about, originally when I brought up the question, I was going to suggest, could we have a chart like, the one above it, age distribution, could we have a chart on showing the median income requirements that defines affordable housing? Because that's what I'm trying to get at. Where do we define what affordable
Yeah,
housing
so that's in the housing
means
It's in the housing
here?
element.
And could we link those so that people would know, well, what?
And
if
it'll
they-
be in this document, so
Yeah,
if this is like page 40, it would be like page 60.
right, but they'll have to go look for it. They'll have to know where to look. is what I'm
Right.
saying. Yeah,
Yeah, it's in the table of contents.
okay. All right, thanks.
So this question is a little, I think it straddles a bunch of different elements here. Is there something in our code, or what we're looking at, that it would allow for a rather decent-sized CCRC community, let's see, continuous care retirement community? So they tend to be larger. They include independent living, going into assisted living, going into end-of-life care, employ a lot of people, so it might help with some of the economic development stuff in terms of, there are people in all ranges of expertise, medical, administrative, food service, all the way around, and provide housing for that aging population we're looking at. People who may live here already but want to downsize, live in a smaller place but still be in their community, age in their own, home. So, I was trying to, my thought had always been the Tri-W's property would be a good place for that. But have we got anything that's specifically zoned for something like that?
Wasn't there a proposal for something like that? I'm thinking like along Los Valley Road or something. I apologize if everybody's looking at me with the questions
I don't
on your
know.
face, but I thought I'd heard of some kind of
There is in
continuous
San
care
Luis
thing.
Obispo.
Okay, but I thought there was something further out here that was proposed.
There might have been.
Could we
Not
do
familiar.
something like that here? Have we got any space?
So that's the constraint.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
largest
Space.
piece of dirt that we have out there is Tri-W, and it has limitations on it.
Okay.
Just based on the referendum that was passed out there, it talks about, more along the sort of generalized commercial uses out there and not
And
housing.
some visitor serving commercial.
Yeah. So it has,
So that would-
and that's limited by the referendum, though. You don't have the ability really to
Right,
break
right,
into
right.
that. So it would have to be in areas elsewhere. And I think to some degree, if you were able to assemble a couple of pieces of property, you could do smaller types of these facilities elsewhere in town, because we have mixed use, overlays over various properties in town. So that could accommodate those, that type of use. We just don't have a lot of land. That's the problem. We're constrained. Our biggest other piece of property in town is probably the 10 acres on North Main that's owned by Chevron West Texaco, that they're trying to get the clearance for, and that's our, high density residential stuff. So Dynegy, could accommodate something like that, if they were to go there.
Especially away
clean it up.
from the Embarcadero, like in the back.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's why we have the master plan requirement on that, and why we have the visitor serving piece up front, but behind could be other stuff, It could be something that has some sort of housing component to it. It could be makerspace. It could be, industrial stuff that's in the back that sits next to the transfer station, because that PG&E transfer station is never going away.
Right.
It will always be there.
Also, highway access. over
Yeah.
there. Highway access.
Yeah, anything that happens there is likely going to have additional access points that go that direction, because you can't access it from the Embarcadero with any size development there. It would bring traffic to a halt.
PG&E is commercial, though. Industrial.
Yeah, it has an industrial use on it.
I just put the map back up so you can see the big blue blob is the PG&E, and then everything else except for the area of Esha is some sort of visitor serving, and then most of it has the overlay for residential.
Yeah.
There still is the area of the elementary school. And I continue to think that, given the decommissioning of the nuclear power plant, the extreme financial situation that the school system can find itself in is going to make them look at that property a little more actively.
Oh, that's an
It's my hope.
interesting point.
It is my hope.
That's a
It is
great-
underutilized, and they don't
Yeah.
invest any money in it, and they don't allow long-term leases, so no one else can invest any money in it. Yeah, so,
That'd be a great location.
That,
yeah,
yeah.
that is a great piece of property. It's just, we need to get some movement by the school district to go someplace else other than where they're at right now with it.
That's a really interesting point. I like that idea. Okay.
Any other thoughts on economic development?
Policy
Policies, or-
ED31 on page 365. Very bottom of the page, sustainable businesses. And I just wondered whether that meant you were attracting businesses that could be sustainable or attracting businesses in the sustainable?
Retention, business.
So it is environmentally conscious
Okay.
businesses, that's
Okay.
what it says there. So
Okay.
that is the idea there.
That's what you mean by sustainable?
So it's
Yeah,
related
if
to
you
the
read the
environmental
policy,
issues.
that's what it
Okay.
says. Attract and retain environmentally conscious businesses that would contribute to the long-term economic and environmental sustainability of Morro Bay. So obviously, you want them to be good at business as well as protecting the environment, but that is what that particular
Okay.
policy is
Stems
intended
from public
for.
outreach.
I wonder, I had two questions. One of them is relating to the power plant. I know we had a bit of a discussion of the power plant when we first started this whole effort, but has anything changed? Is there any communication?
So Dynegy, and maybe you're aware, maybe you're not, it is in the process of being acquired, was acquired, I'm not sure if it's complete yet or not, by Vistra Energy.
Vistra.
We met with the Dynegy folks about 3 months ago on the continued decommissioning project that they have going on. They're getting the pipelines out of the water, they went out to where the ship's tied up and offloaded the fuel. And in talking with them, they said, hey, everything's kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern. We're moving forward with this because we're required to. State lands is requiring them to continue the decommissioning. And that next phase is removal of those pipelines. But they said, we're going to continue to be called Dynegy at least for the next year or so while the reorganization of that company shakes out. Vistra is a Texas-based company entirely. Dynegy has holdings in other states. Not like,
Yeah,
What is
but,
Vista's business?
yeah,
what?
What is Vista's business?
Vistra.
Vistra is an energy company, largely fossil fuel based.
Yeah, they're doing redevelopment of the Moss Landing sites, putting in, I think, energy storage, and at least or considering energy storage for the some of the units that were decommissioned. I was just wondering, is there any discussion about anything like that here?
We haven't really had any conversations with the corporate structure of Vistra. We've only had with conversations more recently with this folks that were still on Dynegy, or originally from Dynegy. They just said they haven't had much movement, and that was, again, 2-3 months ago we met with them. And they didn't expect anything much to change here with regard to this, for the next year. It's going to kind of stay status quo. Meaning, I think it was I took it as meaning it was a low priority for the company. They were more concerned with the larger, functioning assets of the company is what I took away from that conversation.
Okay. And then the other thing that I thought was something I thought was, and it was sort of a second issue, something I thought was missing from here is the development of people with home-based businesses. We do have, I have one, but I know other people do as well. I know there's a group of people who do, and because you do have services available here, it's an internet and other things that are and it's a good location actually for, relative to north or south of the state. It might be nice to mention that somewhere in here, or have some kind of. I know there's a little bit of touchiness if you ever see clients in your house, then the neighbors, whatever. But
we have the home occupation. If you have a business out of your home, it's a home occupation permit,
Yes.
business license.
yeah, I know I've got one.
And that's covered through our zoning code.
Right.
You
But-
got a receipt? Let's see receipt.
It's hanging up on my bulletin board, I know. But yeah, anyway, no, I thought it would be some kind of mention of developing home-based businesses and and economic development in that way, through self-employment or LLCs or whatever, might be good to mention.
I noticed with respect to home occupations, I think this is in the zoning provision that it was limited to one employee, as I recall.
Something along those lines.
Yeah, and I always thought that, if you wanted to encourage these kind of occupations that were really light on the land, accountants, lawyers, architects, you might make a provision for an assistant of sorts so they make their businesses a little more viable.
Well, often what you can have is you can have someone who, like I've outsourced that, you can have someone who works for you. You might meet with them occasionally, but they may have their own, they may be an independent contractor, they have their own office elsewhere, say in the city. So it doesn't mean that they have to be working on site all the time, especially with electronic communications and document exchange.
Yeah, well, but I wondered if some of the professions need a little more flexibility. I'm thinking specifically of a lawyer. discussion. Just triggered something.
Sure.
Before we wrap it up, I just want to, Scott, when you brought up a while back, I forgot the question that kind of got your response, but you were talking about the live above businesses and the connection with the height and everything. I think we really need to be pushing that, because that kills several birds with one stone. I know there's resistance to that 30 foot, but I don't know if people have been educated enough to understand the connection with economic growth and how that could really make the downtown flourish.
I think, I think this board has been telling that story. I think the planning commission's
We
been
all
telling
have.
that story. I think that, that the word's gotten out from the workshops that we've had. I think it's why that policy persists. Sure, there's resistance. I mean, you're going to always have that. Change is difficult. People don't like it. It is moderate, in my opinion, and in the area that it's located, it seems appropriate. Again, it's in Module 2 of the zoning code update, and it's the one piece of Module 2 that is still under review at the Planning Commission. At our last Planning Commission meeting, we were occupied with the vacation rental ordinance, right. And so we're going in. And we're going to talk about the height to the 37 feet at the next at the next meeting. So next week, and then assuming we finish with that, we'll move into Module 3. So
at that workshop we had over at Vets Hall, and we covered that. At least the table I was at, and I seem like I remember a lot of other people speaking up, that there was positive response to that, live above type of concept. So and then that the thing about the height came in and kind of put a damper on it. So
it's still in there. We haven't changed it. I mean, the Planning Commission, when we go, Joe knows, when we go and sit down with them, they'll be, giving direction where the policy goes from their lap. But the GPAC, forwarded on the recommendation to keep it there, and that's what we did. I mean, we didn't alter it.
Do we have any economic data that would forecast how many potential live-abouts could be accommodated in the downtown area, or whatever? Let me rephrase that. The areas that will allow that height, do we have any forecasts of the potential units to be generated?
We didn't evaluate the potential units. We evaluated the potential lots that were likely to go to that height.
Potential what?
Lots.
Okay.
And that information, again, it's in the Planning Commission packet from the last meeting, and it'll be also in the Planning Commission packet for next week's meeting. But there's a map in there that shows there's a map that shows where it's at, and there's a second map that shows the likelihood, kind of based on several constraints about what lots in that area down Morro Bay Boulevard and then turning and going north on Main. How many of those lots we think could, might potentially redevelop, say within the time frame of the life of the zoning code and that type of thing. So it's a moderate amount, but we got a few of them that could change people's opinion about them, or in a good way or a bad way, I guess, depending on what the projects were that came forward. But yeah.
Well, it would help with affordable housing also.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think anytime we're providing, places for people to live, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I saw a real estate ad for a lot that was for sale in that area, and they're already touting the higher height limits and plans for that before they're even adopted. So at least it's definitely getting some attention among the landowners.
That's what I was going to say is, as part of this project, we didn't do those projections, but we definitely are basing it on the best practices and knowledge of what Susan's just talking about, that allowing that greater height gives that flexibility in redevelopment or new development. That is what is looked for a lot these days.
I'm just wondering if we had any data from a city our size that's done something like that, and how many it generated, so we could kind of say, wow, this really does things.
On that subject, there's no doubt it's of keen interest in the planning commission, including myself. Right. I believe the height extension maximum is 37 feet, not 30.
Okay, I misspoke.
But it'd be really interesting, because right now the evidence is sort of anecdotal, but it'd be really interesting to hear from developers as to how much height they need and for what kind of construction, meaning does 32 feet provide 3 stories with residential on top, or is it really necessary for 37, that sort of thing.
So it's reflective of the issues that you run into when you have heights that aren't that tall. So there's unintended consequences of having lower, like, oh, why don't we just have 33 feet? Well, if you're going to be in commercial areas and you want, say, Class A retail space, it's got a 16-foot ceiling in it. We might not need that, but I mean, you just completely eliminate those types of businesses from coming into the city. If you're trying to look at economic development, diversifying the economy, nicer businesses coming to town, you don't want to eliminate a whole sector of the commercial community. So you look at that, you go 16 feet, and you start putting the levels on top of that, and you get, with pitched roofs, up to about 37. That's where we came to it from. I mean, with similar limitations when I was in Pismo to height at the 35 in the downtown area, and that didn't really kind of get you there. We needed 2 more feet to really make good projects that didn't have flat roofs. So.
And I think if you talk to a developer who's got a limited footprint, if they can go up, they can make that footprint pay for itself a lot more easily if they have a second or third floor. And like you say, you need the higher ceilings for the retail space below.
Yeah.
So.
And I think, again, this is probably not the time to launch into it, Chris, and I am doing it, but if we're really serious about a market-priced affordable housing on that third floor, that's not going to happen serendipitously. So we're going to have to think about how we incentivize people to build small apartments rather than 3-bedroom condominiums, that sort of thing.
I think also the third floor, depending on where you are, the third floor is going to have possibly a view. I'm not sure, again, in the absence of some other incentives, how affordable some of that will be. Now, some of it, if they're built next to each other, they won't all be in that situation. But generally, a place with a view here usually will command a premium. So.
Yeah, and in certain areas of that, you would have views that would go out to the ocean for sure on a third floor. Other areas you wouldn't. But
maybe the second floor would be where the affordable housing would be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, 3E is the circulation element, and we start again with the overview as well as the approach to resiliency. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things in the first section, which is the transportation network. So the 2 figures, CIR 1A and CIR 1B, on pages 372 and 373, show the proposed transportation network, and we split it into 2 different figures because it had a lot going on. So the first one highlights the transit, so public transit and bicycle facilities, and the second one is more focused on the automobile. Then we have a section called Other Transportation Components, and this includes movement of goods, so that has to do with truck routes and issues that go along with where we unload and load things, and how we transport through the city. There are the proposed planned circulation improvements. There are metrics having to do with transportation, and I will note that similar to every element, this is backed up by both the baseline assessment, but then in addition there is a study that was done specifically for transportation and circulation, and that's one of the appendices that we've included. So the metrics are fleshed out much more in that study. And then we also have a section on parking, and then we have the goals and policies. So happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, what's the status of the roundabout at 41 in Maine? There's some discussion
So
here
it's,
about enlarging it, but
it's been planned for by the
Yes.
city. That means that it's approved as far as the city is concerned, and it's needed. But I believe the matching funding from the state has not come through. that correct?
Well, we have funding identified through SLOCOG. Caltrans, and looking at the design of it, wanted sidewalks all the way around it. And based on the configuration that we got to at about the 35% design portion of the project, doing that pushed it back into the slope where Highway 1 is, added retaining walls, and kicked the price tag up from about $4 million to about 7 or 8, and basically made it unaffordable. I mean, we don't have that money sitting around. We have funding, from SLOCOG, into that 4-ish range maybe. And so we've been having conversations about how to bring down the cost. We've been talking about some of the transportation with some of the transportation specialists for the state that are experts in roundabouts, about how we might do that and changing configurations, and maybe you don't have to have 2 lanes that go around it. Maybe you can just have one, because that time when the traffic is really bad, there is for about 15 minutes during the day, or a half hour during the day once you put the roundabout in, and so you're okay with the delays for a shorter amount of time versus doing nothing. Because if we were to signalize it, we could signalize it down. It would improve intersection function for a while, but then it would blow it back out again in the out years. So really, the roundabout's probably the best solution. It's just coming up with a cost that we can swallow, and right now it's not there. But still on the plan. I mean, we're still working on it, I guess. I should say.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that is really the worst intersection in town, I think, and even when it's done, it would be also good to make sure that right now the roundabout that we have, the cars go across the crosswalk and then stop. That's just the weirdest design. They think they would stop before they got to the crosswalk, and I walk there a lot, and then there's a lot of real confusion about cars not realizing that pedestrians are supposed to go in front of them before they stop. It's a little bit of a strange design, so I'm hoping that that's not the way the other one will go.
On your figure CIR 1B, there's a little box on the map here.
Oh, okay.
Page 373.
Yep. Evaluate vehicular connections across Morrow Creek into Main Street and SR1 Main Street interchange, upgrades as part of power plant redevelopment plan. Does that include that really awful intersection at Redcliffe? Because you should expand the box to include it if it doesn't. Because that would be a good way to maybe deal with that. There are times when traffic there and with Little Morrow Creek Road going in and out and trying to make left turns or turn into that area, turn out of that area is really, really awful, and it's all blind curves under the highway.
It looks like it's actually just inside that
It
one
just
square.
barely, but I
Just on the
wonder,
edge of it, yeah, it's
without.
it's a collector street there.
Without really, it's kind of, right
Right here.
there.
Yeah, I think it's
I'm
in
not
there.
sure off the top of my head. I'm looking to see if it's in the circulation element study. But to explain the boxes on that figure a little bit more, they are each related to proposed planned circulation improvements that are discussed in the element, and so are in response to an area that we're seeing a pretty large increase in traffic if everything was built out in that area. So
The sense that
it
I
would
got,
be in addition to the issues that are there now. But I can
the sense
see
that
if
I got
I'm
from
finding
reading
that.
further was that more related to what, if there was more development at the power plant area, and then you'd be creating some kind of crossing of the creek that would be needed to get you over to Highway 1. So it didn't seem to really address that Radcliffe, Little Morrow
I
Creek
think
interchange.
there are also issues on Main Street at Little Morrow Creek, right? If I'm recalling correctly, in the traffic study, not just related to the Dynegy area.
Okay.
But it is all related to the proposed development that could occur under the plan, in addition to what's happening now. Yeah.
You may recall that when we initially talked about densities underneath the land use scenarios that we had, that we general plans now, general plan land use law requires us to have densities for the commercial developments. We didn't have those before. And so you have those densities that come forward, we identify them for properties, and then you push those out through the traffic model to see what, if you reach them, which you really never do. But if you reach to them, then it lays out what that does from a traffic standpoint on your street system, and it blows out every intersection in the immediate vicinity.
Like on
Sure.
370?
Yeah,
That projected 212,000.
It's pretty
trips a
rough,
day.
but but it's also why you require master plans for these,
Yeah.
because master plans deal with infrastructure that goes along with the proposed development, so that they have to put in the bridge that goes across Morrow Creek, the extra access point that goes and accesses over to Main or to Highway 1 directly off the east side of the power plant, those types of things.
So those numbers are based on projected ADTs for the traffic then?
Yeah, yes, it is.
And I did mention when we were talking about the land use element, when we looked at the development capacity table, I did hear back from our transportation subconsultant that the increase in the non-residential square footage, 50% of it can be attributed just to Dynegy and the area around the existing
Sure.
wastewater treatment
That
plant.
makes sense.
The rest of it is spread out somewhat evenly in the areas that have significant changes to them in terms of their allowed land uses. And 80% of the visitor serving land use designation is in those two areas. So just to give you a sense for where those numbers are coming from.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was asking that question, just for the public, really, if they're listening. You know, we're spent a lot of time on the economic development plan and talking about how to increase our tourism activity and such, and we're going to be increasing traffic at the same time and impacting the circulation element as we do that, so.
It's one of the things you have to go in, you have to relook at your traffic impact fees, and this comes up with improvements based on traffic levels that you would put in your CIP, all those types of things. I mean, that's part of what we're doing here.
Right, I just hope the public understands that none of these things are in a vacuum. They're all related, they're all connected,
A lot of moving parts.
yeah.
General light industrial.
I'm still looking for some additional information on the Morrow Creek question, but if there are other questions or comments, please
What,
go ahead.
what we were just looking for was that area, you know, where the bike park is? Is that on the master plan? I don't remember. Is that commercial, planned to be commercial, or is that light industrial, or?
It's currently light industrial.
And it remains light industrial, I believe. It's even, because that area,
Yeah, that's right, it's purple.
yeah, it's industrial.
Bike park is city owned.
Well, a portion of it's city-owned, the parking lot for it is owned by PG&E.
Yeah.
It's not proposed to change land use.
Do you have any idea if PG&E is going to keep that property, or?
They will absolutely keep it, because that power line corridor is never going away. It provides pretty much all of the power to the Central Coast.
Oh, so it'll probably stay like it is.
That thing's never going anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, they're talking to us about upgrading the towers over there right now. Cindy's been talking to them, so.
So when we're talking about a new vehicular connection from the power plant to Main Street near Highway 1 and across Morrow Creek to Atascadero Road on page 387, we're not talking about adding traffic to the bike bridge, right? We're talking about a new bridge.
It would have to be figured out during the master plan
Okay.
process, but that's,
Okay,
the discussions we've had, that's the likely.
okay, just wanted to,
That would be the
because I
route,
remember
though,
when
right?
that bridge was built, it was like, no vehicles except maybe an emergency vehicle.
Yeah, which was short-sighted, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
but it was.
It was a big deal. No,
Yes, I remember.
So, yeah, I mean, I get why it's the way that it was, because of the pushback that was received for it.
So we'd have a second bridge.
So we would potentially have a second bridge,
Okay.
or
Enlarge
the bridge that's there goes away and we build a new one that has both pieces to it, the pedestrian and bike access, as well as the travel lanes for cars. That's probably where we'd end up with coastal.
Well, that makes sense because it's in the existing footprint of the road. I mean, it's laid out. It would be the most logical.
That's where you put, that's why I say that.
Cost effective, yeah.
Yeah.
The last bullet here is why I asked the question I did on the roundabout, because it talks about the existing roundabout. And this is at Morro Bay Boulevard in Quintana. So when you're talking about expanding the existing roundabout, how would that be done? You'd have to, there's businesses there, there's,
Yep, you have to acquire land.
okay.
City has the ability to do that. We have it through eminent domain and those types of processes. If we couldn't buy it outright, just negotiate it. You typically try to negotiate those things.
Yeah, you would
And-
suck up some of the landscaping, on the
That's
outside.
that's normally what happens.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of all of that. You kind of reconfigure things and to make it work. I mean, this is under the full build-out scenario that's in here.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, realistically, we're never going to get there, especially not in the lifetime of this document. But that being again, a lot of this goes into redevelopment of the power plant site, what you put there, and that type of stuff. So that could take place during this time frame, and then we'd have to come up with what's that look like, and then they'd have to address it through the master plan.
Scott, I'm assuming we'll all get to see a plan of this roundabout at Highway 41 someday? Because when we're talking about it here, it also says the southbound ramps will maybe be expanded and have a left turn lane and a right turn lane. So those southbound ramps are not planned to be included in the roundabout?
It's on the other side.
So not in the current design, it doesn't do that. That would be, projected out were we to develop, again, the either the wastewater treatment plant site, you're able to redevelop that substantially, which is questionable based on, even the previous conversation that we had earlier, or to really densely develop the power plant site, at which point then those types of reconfigurations would probably be necessary. But again, I don't think, you usually don't reach the maximum development potential on the lot for various reasons. So it's unlikely that we would get there, but we set the densities, and so we have to do the traffic model based on that. And so that's why you have these numbers and these concerns. They point them out because they don't want you to be blindsided when you do the master plan and it says, yep, you're going to bring all this commercial square footage in here, you're going to bring this 1,000-room hotel in here, you're going to have a problem.
Well, I've just been trying to imagine at that intersection how all those roads and ramps and stuff are going to be involved. I'm thinking it's going to be more of an oval about instead of a roundabout.
The design of it right now is oval. It's more of an
is?
oval, it's not, yeah.
And then it
about,
says that
that's a new one.
but these are not going to be included, these ramps.
So
Not current.
if you, page 387, the opening paragraph talks about the roundabout that Scott has already been describing that is
Yeah.
currently planned for and is warranted, as the terminology goes, by our current traffic situation. And then all the bullets that are below that are what would possibly be needed under the build-out of the plan.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
So your comment begs a question for me about eminent domain, which I understand, but has the city ever exercised eminent domain?
I don't know if the city of Morro Bay has. Not clear to me.
We developed a policy not to do it, so that's why I was wondering.
I don't think the city's, I don't think it's done it in recent times anyway, because I don't recall seeing articles in the paper about it before I started working here. We haven't done it since I've been here, so. I
Interesting.
mean, normally you just go into negotiations to try to acquire property if it's there. I mean,
Yeah.
usually that's the best way to do it. And it's less of an issue if you have commercial things that are around it, which all the stuff around that's commercial.
Yeah.
So it's less of it's not as much of an impact on them if it was, say, residential development or something.
Doable.
This is just a comment and nothing probably that belongs in here, and we've talked about it so many times, you're probably going to throw me out of the room, Scott, but on page 393, under parking, saying that, basically, most of the time we have sufficient supply of parking, and I think as a local, I could say that's true, but when I think about what it's like for a visitor coming into town to an event or to shop or whatever they're doing, and not really understanding the side streets and the neighborhoods and whether they can park there and where can they go, and what if they took this turn here, would they get lost going back to there? And not everybody's connected to GPS and smartphones. So in my mind, signage and parking lots are huge. So, and the universal P, and I know we can't always direct people, well, just go park at Albertsons because that's Albertsons parking lot. But we could say, go park at the community center because that's the city's, or the library, or near the visitor center. But was thinking about even Art in the Park, which, happens 3 times, and you talk to those vendors there, and they don't get the massive numbers of people that they would expect at an event of that size. And I know Steve is doing a great job of promoting and getting great artists in there, but I think some of it has to do with a person who's not familiar with Morro Bay coming in, and you've got that V, and you might drive around a little bit and think, gee, there's just nowhere to park, and they go on. So I do think that's an issue. I think, whether we find one of those empty lots further down in the center of town and say, okay, that's going to be a parking lot, whether maybe we can work something out with whoever buys Bank of America and use that lot, but just some place to direct people, here's a place you can go and park your car, would be really
Yeah, I
helpful.
mean, we have ongoing planning efforts. We'll probably, after the first of the year, be bringing an item back to council that, where we discuss parking and have money in the budget to restripe, at least on the street that we talked about.
Yeah, I love that
I
idea.
mean, we
Yeah.
can add up to 200 and change parking spaces, in the generalized downtown, and see where we are at that point. And that would be a substantial change.
Yep.
Would allow us also to, have the conversation about, are we going to have some paid parking in certain areas and then free parking on the fringe where we add these parking spaces. So you can direct turnover, which is often what you want.
Well,
So-
and also decide, are we going to direct turnover? Are we going to, we have 2-hour limits on the signs that are very faded, and people always come up and say, well, how long can I park here? I don't want to get a ticket. It's like, no code enforcement, just go for it, So, but on the other hand, it might be nice to say, you've got 2 hours, shop here.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be, obviously, any decision made on that's going to be
Right.
involve a lot of public outreach because
Yes.
we're not just going to implement something.
Yeah.
But we're going to have that conversation with the council coming up so they can give us direction that yes, they want us to pursue those things, or no, they want to,
Yeah.
stick the
It's-
knife in it and kill it.
It's hard because I think as locals, we think like locals, and we know there's plenty of spaces. You can go sneak around and find the hidden spots, but visitors, that's a whole other thing.
Well, especially in the times when it is busy, that's when it's hard for them to find the spaces, and they're
Yeah.
definitely not going to find them like you talked about. So,
Yeah,
if we're able to direct them, to better locations where we have increased density of parking, then that's good. And we recently added some of those parking signs that direct you to the parking lots down the Embarcadero, going down Harbor Street. Public Works put those in, I think, around December-ish. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
So, incremental steps, I suppose, but.
Okay.
And we do have, in the implementation section table, we have CIR 12. That gets at what you're talking about. And so just a reminder that we have those actions that correspond to the different elements back there as well.
CRA.
Where you,
This is page 5-17.
Okay.
The implementation section.
Oh,
Yeah, oh, that,
5-7, way in the
So
back.
it talks about the policies in the section, but then it goes, hey, if you want to, this is what you're supposed to go do to make that happen.
Yeah.
Effectively become
Tables.
the goals for the city that the city council adopts over time for implement. So-
Yeah. God, your work's already done for the goal planning.
Well, if this gets done and adopted, yes, it'll be done for the next 20 years.
Yeah, just peel it out. Here it is.
Yeah, which ones here's a list. Just pick which ones you want us to go do.
Which is
Sweet.
really a good thing. I ran into Jamie Irons yesterday, and he'd just been down to Long Beach for the first time in 30 years. And it turns out he'd been down there when they were doing their general plan, in whatever that was, 30 years ago, and they're redoing it now. But he could see the changes in that city, that it, went from kind of a pretty funky place to a really nicely redeveloped city based on what their general plan guidelines had said.
Well, the whole conference facility down there was born out of the general plan update that he was
Yeah.
talking to you about.
Yeah.
They also have fish crosswalks. I don't know if you mentioned
I
that.
like that.
They do,
I
that's
do
right.
like that idea.
Which when I was there, I thought this could be something that
That's not
would
a
work
sea
in
level
Morro
rise
Bay.
thing or anything, right?
They have fish painted on the street.
Well, we thought about doing that in the middle of the night, going and painting the crosswalks with shells and fish. All right. Anything else on that section? Circulation, we're done?
No, well, I do have
Okay.
a couple of things. On page 397, there was a thing about the in-lieu parking, update parking fee requirements to expand options for how in-lieu fees can improve access to downtown businesses in the coast. How does that work? How does in-lieu, is that the in-lieu parking fees pay for the striping of the?
It would pay for a space somewhere else that's
Which
not
may-
right in front of that business. That's one way that it works.
But
And
then
then-
if,
So it's, instead of requiring every single storefront in downtown, for example, to have a certain number of parking spaces, it would put them somewhere close by, but not right in front of that particular
so
structure.
Susan can pay in-lieu fees to have her parking spaces up by the library?
The specific locations, I guess, I would have to defer to the city.
Yeah, I mean, so that's one of the things you talk about, hey, are we able to, we can acquire money and then buy a lot, put a parking lot there or a parking structure over time or what have you. That's one option for in-lieu fees. The city, these in-lieu fees aren't set at a price that would really accommodate that. And it also, when you get really high prices, if you're like, it's about $46,000 a parking space if you're gonna build a parking structure, somewhere around there. If you set your parking in lieu fees at that, we would never get redevelopment in town. Would never.
$46,000 a parking space?
That's about the cost of a parking space for a parking structure. So that's about the maximum number you could set it at. And I use that because when I did work for the city of Pismo Beach, we had a parking in lieu fee that was $36,000. It was several years ago, and it completely stopped redevelopment in the downtown, and they removed it a couple of years ago. Or reduced it down substantially. But it literally, every time they came in, they were like, oh, we can pay in lieu fees, and no one ever did it. Not no one. We had one project in the time that I was there that bought in lieu fees at $36,000 a space right down next to the water at the right before the recession. So it was like kind of at the peak of the market, and then the recession went down, and it was actually building it and had to pay us that money during the recession.
So if they don't really work, why would you expand them?
Well, the idea is to expand it is to allow in lieu fees, set it at a price that's reasonable, and expand it to other areas of town. Because what happens where it is right now, it's just focused on a very specific portion of downtown, whereas you can't pay them elsewhere. And so it might be to expand the area where you can pay them. That was probably the thought.
But then if there's no place to build a parking lot downtown, then what's the point? Is I guess is what I don't understand how they help.
Well, there potentially is. I mean, there's public-private partnerships. The B of A example was a great one. There's a huge parking lot behind that structure, right?
Right.
And you could go 2 levels of parking above it. So the city, and any business that goes in there won't need that parking, but the city could partner with them to put a parking structure behind there and add, I don't know, 75 parking spaces or something there.
Easy.
And yeah, so that's an example of something that the city could do. And if you put paid parking in, then potentially it could pay for itself over time. Just depends. So yeah, you got to look at opportunities like that oftentimes versus we don't have a lot of vacant land. You're aware of that.
And if you are a business and you're not in a parking in lieu area, it really stifles economic development because then now that person doesn't have the option to pay in lieu fees, but they want to do some type of commercial development, so they're required to meet their parking demand on site. So the ramifications of that development-wise would be build a smaller building, have this parking lot, it gets really challenging, and so.
So
that-
this would go toward a parking
Yeah, so that, so
spot,
so
a
it would be
parking-
good, a business person would want to, in that case, have an ability to pay in lieu if that were an available option to them.
Okay. Then on the circulation 4.6, excess right-of-way parking, help accommodate the parking needs of the commercial establishments in Vets Hall through the use of this. How does this work? There's no room down there to build more parking places, are there?
Well, maybe you could explain what excess right-of-way
Yeah.
is.
We have unimproved right-of-way over here, especially like right out by the vet hall. And there was a plan that they adopted to stripe both sides, right? And I don't think they,
Like right there on Surf Street, yeah.
Yeah.
They were gonna make it angled.
yeah, they had a plan to make it angled and pick up some of that unimproved right-of-way it's not road surface or anything like that, and to create angled parking, so there's more parking there, because sometimes when we have hot topic items that are on
Right,
agendas at city council meetings, there's no place to park, and people have to walk from far away and they complain about it.
So the houses that are along Surf Street, just like across the street from the Veterans Hall, their property doesn't extend to the pavement, their property only goes like to their front fences?
That's correct, and that situation is pervasive throughout the city. Your house, where you live, you might have 8, 9, 10 feet of right-of-way out in front that you landscape and looks like yours, but it's not. We have some really streets with really wide right-of-ways at some point, somebody thought the city was gonna be, have massive street systems or something, I don't know.
So,
But,
for example, Ridgeway is 80 feet wide. So if you're familiar with how wide that street is, there's 80 feet of right-of-way.
so almost 20 on either side of it.
Yep.
Or 15 on either
80
side of it
feet,
that's
80.
undeveloped.
Yeah, so that the street itself is not 80 foot wide, but if you were to,
The right-of-way.
measure back from the center line 40 feet on each side, that would be what is right-of-way, and chances are you would encroach into people's landscaped area that they think is their front yard.
Yeah.
You could put in sidewalks.
Everybody's told us they don't want sidewalks. That's our traffic calming devices in our neighborhoods, is to have people walking around in the street.
There you go.
That's
So-
how,
I'd say it was a good idea.
that's what makes me, I forget when I'm not in Morro Bay and start walking in the street somewhere.
Get on the sidewalk.
It hurts in other cities.
The idea in the expression that's been put forward to us is that they like the more rural feel, and so that's kind of where that's coming from. It's not to have the sidewalks, so it feels like we're more rural.
Right.
So
Well, I think it's good that people landscape, because in some places, I know in Los Osos, there's a lot of places where people have this very fancy landscaping that stops about 8 feet before the street, and it's just dirt. And then there's no sidewalk, and you're just walking in the dirt. So I think actually understanding that they might get their landscaping taken away, it's kind of nice when
Right.
people will go all the way to the street.
Okay.
So, picking up on what you were talking about, Cindy, when you were replying on the parking in lieu, and there are certain areas of town that don't have that option. And I guess I'm looking back, combining this back to economic development. Would that be a possible reason why, then that would probably dictate some lower rental rates and dictate a business that isn't as vibrant, or could pay the city a better sales tax. So I could see a link to expanding that in lieu fees to allow for businesses that would come in that would take advantage of that and then pay and raise our sales tax base.
One of the issues that we see a lot is restaurants that exist in town or that come in and they're like, oh, we'd like to add a small patio outside, outdoor dining, right? We encourage that. But they don't have any place to put it, and they can't. And if they do add that space, then they have to add parking to go along with it. You get 125 square feet free. That's like a table and a half.
Right.
So it does not much. So if you allow larger spaces, which we are in the current zoning code, we're one of the things, moving barriers, we're allowing them to have larger outdoor spaces for restaurants and things like that without having to provide the parking that would go along with them, because we want to encourage those things. But the in lieu fee would be another way for other businesses that want to expand, do even small expansions, and they wouldn't be able to because they have no place to park it. They could maybe pay the in lieu fee. We could provide the parking elsewhere, and then they'd be able to, invest in their property and, maybe upgrade. Next step. We're not looking at wholesale changes, but if we could raise everybody up, a step, on the economic ladder, that'd be a good thing. So.
And that's the example we see most, like working at the planning counter. Someone comes in with a restaurant, and because our parking ordinance parks per customer dining area, not the size of the restaurant's kitchen, someone comes in, I'm going to do this great restaurant. I've got 8 tables. Well, that equals 3 parking spaces, and there's 2 on the site. Okay, so then now they come forward with a business license application. Well, they're only going to have 4 tables. I mean, that directly impacts economic development, because now that person's making less money, and maybe they can only afford less, commercial rent, and,
That's what
yeah.
I'm getting- yeah.
Seen that many times over the years.
So hopefully, we'll give Erica and the chamber tools to work with the ambassador program to go out and sell these new improvements to bring business in then. So I had one more question on the circulation element on that same page, 4.1. And, sometimes I take things too literally, so I want to clarify. Modify parking requirements, eliminate minimum parking requirements when and where appropriate to promote walkable neighborhoods. Are we talking about what I look at as a neighborhood? Or are we talking about business neighborhood? Because we have language in back to our
Residential.
I think it's right.
accessory dwellings and the vacation rentals that are not eliminate, we're encouraging all the parking on the property. This seems to, again, if I'm not taking this literally, it seems to conflict with that other language.
I think it's generally residential, and I think, I know that state law has decreased the parking requirements for accessory dwelling
Exactly.
units. Yeah, so that would go along with this policy.
So that's speaking to that then.
But that's just one example of, one small part of what this could cover.
And I think we're looking at, and what we've talked about, I'm reviewing it right now, so I haven't gotten to the parking piece of the module 4 yet, is parking maximums. And that was a concept that we talked about. So it's a different way of looking at parking for uses. As opposed to the minimums, we have parking maximums. So because use of area on land for parking is probably not the highest and best use for that area. Might be for buildings or more units or what have you, and if we can solve the parking, we have a parking solution that's something else that's probably a better way to do it, whether that's off-site parking, whether that's improved transit in the city so people don't have to have two cars, one car, what have you. There's a lot of projects down in the Southern California area, even Santa Barbara has them, where they have the smaller units, and you have to agree not to have a car to live in them, and they don't have parking spaces for them. So you can do things like that if you have the transit system in place to accommodate it.
Yeah. Well, I'm all for the walkable neighborhoods and more walking throughout the city. I just wanted to make sure that I understood what it was talking about. It is talking about neighborhoods then.
Yeah.
That one really covers so many different things. It could also include, it's more about design, where you have like a sea of cars and parking lot, rather than something that might be more interesting or engaging for a pedestrian. We've talked about the dead zone between the Embarcadero and downtown a lot when we were doing the downtown plan. Areas like that where if we didn't have the kind of parking requirements for every use in place, that perhaps they would be more appealing over time.
Okay. So to summarize then, we're going to encourage no sidewalks and people walking in the street to help with traffic control and to promote walkable neighborhoods. Is that right?
Something along those lines.
So then what
A
are the
uniquely Morro Bay situation.
Yes.
So then what is an example of a maximum parking? You're eliminating the minimum and establishing maximum.
This is where, here we have the policy level, so it really doesn't get into the mathematics and the detail, but in the zoning code, what Scott was just referring to in the module that you haven't seen yet, there's a large table where it's broken out into the different uses that might locate in a particular site, and there's a requirement for each type of use, how many parking spaces they need to have. And the idea is that there might be, the concept of a minimum being appropriate has been in place for a long time, but this idea that maybe there's actually a maximum number that we want to have on a site, whether it could be based on the acreage of that site, or it could be based on the uses that are located there, usually at least the uses. So that your whole site isn't taken up with parking for certain uses, and usually we see that in places that have a combination of businesses. It's not, I don't know, I'll let Scott and Cindy respond to, but
So
that's
an example,
idea.
currently for accessory dwelling units, or at least in the past, prior to state law changing, we would park them by bedroom. So if you had a 2-bedroom accessory dwelling unit, it would be 2 parking spaces. In the module that you haven't seen yet, some of the proposed changes under parking, to be consistent with state law, the maximum parking requirement would be one parking spot per unit. There's no more of the per bedroom
Oh, okay.
thing.
Okay.
So that's an example.
Thank you for the example.
And could otherwise be 0 parking spaces, depending on
What was that?
whether you're, and it could also be 0 parking spaces if you're within a half mile of a transit stop, which every place in the city is.
I really like that, actually. I often thought that the idea that there has to be a two-car garage with every house was kind of a waste of space and just not what the culture does with the garage most of the time. So to say you can have a maximum of 2 cars rather than saying a minimum, I don't know, it kind of makes sense to me.
No, in particular, I remember that planning seminar, they calculated the square footage under a parked car, 27,000. So you have 2 cars in the structure of the garage, and you're talking about $65,000 or $70,000, which might not be necessary to achieve affordable housing if you didn't have such a luxurious accommodation for your cars.
Well, I wonder if carports and other things would also be a,
Yeah.
alternative.
That triggers another, we talked about this, I don't know when, which year it was since we've been here, but we talked, I think I brought it up, about the garages, can we retroactive, so if we don't have to have a garage, that could be a great opportunity, and taking off what Joe said, for affordable housing units by converting those to a accessory dwelling unit.
That's
Which
part of the new state law.
Yeah, state law does that.
So we'll be able to go back. So somebody that, in other words, if their house was built when the planning, the zoning required two covered parking spaces, if they have enough property, they could convert that garage to a accessory dwelling unit, which could be affordable housing.
You could, for your house, you could convert your 2-car garage to an accessory dwelling unit, park the 2 spaces there out in the driveway, voila, you're done. You have an accessory dwelling unit. You already have one, but you could have done that.
Underneath my house? Oh. No.
If you didn't have the ADU in the
But
back.
no,
If
but,
you didn't
but-
already have one.
yeah, no, I get it, but it just, I'm conflicted because my career was part with affordable housing and low-income neighborhoods, and so I get it that we want to provide affordable housing. I support that 100%, but there's barriers, like I said, with the income stuff, and this is another opportunity if we can promote and maybe even come up with some monies or some matching funds that a developer or a owner occupied property could convert their garage into a second accessory dwelling unit. We could have a lot of affordable housing.
We're seeing a rather dramatic uptick in the number of applications for
Okay.
accessory dwelling units based on the changes that were made in state law. I mean, they're having an effect. We see it coming across the counters. The planners are having those conversations, about, a good third of the applications, it seems, to come in for people that are doing remodels to their houses and things.
That's
Most of
exciting.
our stuff is remodeling additions
Yeah,
to single-family
sure.
homes. So we see it quite a bit.
That's exciting.
Shall we move on to noise? I'll be quiet now.
Library time.
Okay, so the noise element, 3F, we have our overview and resiliency approach. This is a pretty technical element. So the next section is how noise and vibration are measured and how, what is used in this particular document. There have been some changes over the years to approaches for noise elements. Then we have the types of noise sources that are evaluated, standards, and land use compatibility issues. There was a survey done of the existing noise levels here in Morro Bay, and then we also have figures in there that show existing and then projected based on the plan and the build out that's proposed. We have noise exposure and mitigation for specific locations, so that would be, areas that might need some extra attention related to noise, noise reduction strategies, and then the key issues highlighted are sensitive land uses, land use compatibility, mobile noise sources, and temporary noise sources. And then we have goals and policies addressing all of those things. I'm happy to take questions and discussion.
How much, so a lot of the noise comes from the highway. How much responsibility do we as a city have for creating noise barriers? How much is Caltrans? How much does Caltrans not allow us to do certain things? I know there are limits to what we can do near freeways. But, you know, the chain link fence is ugly and, you know, there's no good screening with foliage or anything. Would that be on the city to deal with or on Caltrans or both, or it's never going to happen, or?
I think
I don't know.
Caltrans took some foliage out. Well, I know some people who lived along there, they took some foliage out, actually, that was acting as a noise barrier.
Yeah, I mean, our
dead,
our
dying.
chain link fences that run along Highway 1 are not the most attractive thing in the world. I don't imagine we're going to get them changed anytime soon, though, unfortunately. So anything we wanted to put in that would be decorative, and also sort of the purposes of noise attenuation would probably be on the city or a developer to do something along those lines, although, again, most of our land's developed. So, I mean, I don't see those types of things happening. The noise element is typically, you know, to identify areas where you could have noise impacts, say from Highway 1. If your development's within a certain distance of it, you have to do a noise study, and then you propose specific treatments to the building of the structure. That you don't have like vents facing the noise source because that gets noise into your house. That you may have dual glazing, you'd probably have that anyway, based on Title 24, but it does things like that. Solid core doors versus doors that are, you know, hollow.
Sometimes triple glazed glass.
Sometimes, good point. So usually you get a noise or acoustical analysis of the development that's proposed, and it makes recommendations for how it's constructed. And so those things go into the building permit application that gets submitted to the city.
I noticed there was, there's a lot of discussions of sources of noise here, but there wasn't, things like barking dogs or loud music or things that people do in their homes. I noticed it doesn't really seem, I apologize if I missed
It's
it.
an
But
immunity code, I think.
Yeah,
Is
that
it?
would
Okay.
be in the regulatory.
Okay, so that's not
Yeah.
generally part of this. Okay, so that makes sense.
On
Except it'll be
3.123, policy 2.4, noise reducing technologies. Do we have any data, and Scott, I don't know if you would know, but Rob would know, data on the effect of noise reducing technologies in the paving surfaces versus the walls that are put up to try to reduce the decibel levels?
Other than generalized knowledge of that,
Okay.
I don't have much.
And do you know if we're looking at any of that stuff in with city work as far as doing noise reduction with the resurfacing?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I doubt it, given that, most of the stuff that we're doing is not repaving, but really trying things to extend the life of the pavement that's out there. So it's probably more of a concern is how much square footage of streets can we get, resealed and that type of thing.
Understand. I know this would be a drop in the bucket, but do we have any policy, or would we consider policy in the development standards that would require a developer to include noise reducing technology in any paving they had to do on a development?
I mean, we don't have any policies to do that. I'm trying to think of what that would look like.
That what I've read about it doesn't seem like the cost, it doesn't really impact the cost. They're getting some technology that's pretty good as far as making it quieter.
Yeah, I know there are, different materials that you can use that, some are louder than others. I just have a generalized,
Okay.
knowledge of it. I don't have anything very specific. It's not something I've looked at in probably a couple of years, really,
Okay.
to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Anything else on noise? It was very technical.
That was interesting.
But important.
Noise is, in reports you get back on development, they're fascinating about how noise travels and what it does. It's just, You can put in those sound walls next to freeways, and noise can hit it, and if they're not designed correctly, it'll bounce over it, and the noise that would otherwise have been right up there in front, the development that's there, bounces, 2 blocks in, and then it's super loud at, a house that's, several hundred yards away from the noise source. It's
Well, I was also
Crazy.
thinking about climate
Vegetation
change
just
and
sort of-
noise and fog, because when it's
Like that
foggy,
strip on
the
Main
noise almost goes away.
Just like snow.
And it is, it's like snow. It's interesting
Where is this?
here
Here.
in town,
Oh,
when it
I'm
gets foggy. I'm not a great sleeper, so I wake up a lot. And I wake up almost more when it's quiet because I'm not hearing the ocean, I'm not hearing any of the highway noise, I'm not hearing the birds, or, it's like, wait a minute. And that fog really dampens the noise. And you should be hearing foghorns even, but, sometimes you barely hear that. So I wonder with climate change, what that's going to do to Morro Bay and sound, and because it's probably deadening a lot more than we think when we have all the fog. Yeah.
So when would we implement any of these goals and policies? Is this within our purview, or is this like the one on North Main, that's all Caltrans, right? That-
So, we have all the implementation sections here, and they kind of talk about, how you would do them and when you would do them. And a lot of them, are triggered or predicated on, development and those types of things. Most of them are, it looks like. It does talk about, developing, a document that has noise attenuation policies and concepts in it. So there might be ones that are preferred or work better for the city, and you could have those done by an acoustical engineer, help you out preparing those, putting those together. That would be more tailored, to the city of Morro Bay and at where our noise sources are and that type of thing. I suggest one of the things that we do is to create something like that. It's actually not something that's all that difficult, really, but.
Yeah.
I know there was a problem with one of the apartment units in that building where Morro Bay Drug and Gift is. That's right next to the restaurant, which has a generator that's going all the time.
Oh.
And
It was the fan, I think,
The
wasn't
fan,
it? It was the
something.
exhaust fan, yeah.
they had a hard time selling that place because people would go in there and go, whoa, that's loud. And there was not a whole lot at that point that
Restaurant
could
was
be
there
done.
first.
Restaurant was there
Yeah,
first.
that's right.
And I guess by the whatever standards it was built with, it didn't have those.
You get to smell
Noise
the
deadening.
good smells of the
Good
restaurant,
food,
so
and
that
go down for
mitigate
breakfast.
that
Yeah,
a little bit, yeah.
Okay. Are we into the green print?
We are. So, one thing I noticed that I don't know if anyone else noticed, that we actually in the description for the blueprint and green print, we took one of the elements from the green print and put it in the blueprint. So we'll fix that. So the community well-being element should also be in the introduction to the green print. But similar to the blueprint, we've got how this section of the plan is organized and the elements that are included, and then how to use it. So I don't know if there are any other comments on this section.
I would say that the page numbers are a lot easier to read with the green than the blue.
Yeah, so we definitely noted
We
that
took note of that
comment
last
last time, and
Okay.
we'll definitely be addressing that with the
Thank
blue.
you.
We had the same issue when we were
yeah.
talking over changes on the phone, like, nope, it's a page number.
Okay.
And if that's it for the green print intro, we can start on conservation element. I understand we need to end at quarter till, so we just have a few minutes left. Is that correct?
I have to go at quarter till.
Oh, good, 'cause-
I told them in advance.
Did you read?
I guess that takes away the quorum, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does, that's why we, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Didn't know it would do that.
So what time is it? Is it almost time?
You got about 3 minutes.
So it actually might be appropriate to end right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if there's any comments that, from the GPAC moving forward, so we can kind of conclude the meeting
That makes sense.
Okie dokie.
while we have a forum.
All right, anybody have any final comments?
I just wanted to say thanks. We made good progress today.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
So we're going to adjourn to 6:14. The next meeting is
Next meeting, yeah.
14th.
Yeah.
Is
And that will be a
events hall or here?
3-hour meeting.
It's back here.
Back here? Good.
Okay. So,
Well, if you know where I live, right over here on Estero, I mean, I'm only 5 blocks from here.
Oh, yeah, I went by here and then
walk
had to
over
come
here.
back. I'm like, oh,
Walk over
no.
here to Tai Chi and Qigong all the time, and I go over there and back over here.
Yeah.
It's all good.
all right, so we're adjourning early. I
thank
want to
you.
say thank you to staff and consultants. I think you're doing a great job. Our next meeting will be an additional special meeting, Thursday, June 14th at 4 o'clock here at the Community Center, not at the Vets Hall. Repeat that, Community Center.
we have a regular meeting
June
also
14th.
after?
And I believe that one was scheduled 4 to 7, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, 4 to 7, so bring snacks.
Well, we're hoping to get through the remainder of it.
Right.
When we're done, we're done.
Yeah.
But that was the
Are we
idea.
still
Then we
having
have
the
the break.
regular meeting also?
Yes.
On the
On the
21st?
21st?
Yeah, so then the
Okay.
regular meeting the week later at the Vets Hall.
Yeah.
Yep, that'll be back in.
All right, thank you, everybody.
All right. Was that the one, she from the Chamber of Commerce?
Erica Crawford, yeah, she's the president and CEO of Chamber.
Well, the reason I'm asking is somebody, I'm closing escrow on a house tomorrow that has a rental unit.